James Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Order, 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 order. There was a lot of interjection. I've called for order. I've moved to the next question. I don't want more interjection continuing. James Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Tourism and reads, what advice has he received about the risks to the tourism sector from pollution in New Zealand's rivers and lakes?
The Right Honourable John Key.
Mr. Speaker, I've not received any advice from officials that our freshwater quality is a risk to the tourism industry. I am advised that New Zealand's overall natural environment meets or exceeds the expectations of 99% of visitors. The government recognises the importance of water quality to New Zealanders and tourists. That is why the government spent $115 million on freshwater clean-up between 2008 and 2015 and committed a further $300 million to that process. This compares to the paltry $29 million spent in the 9 years of the previous Labor government.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, James Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that answer, why then has the Tourism Export Council called on him specifically to recognise the value of clean water to the industry and to stop rivers and lakes from being sucked dry and polluted at such an unprecedented level?
The Right Honourable John Key.
I think everybody in the tourism sector would expect and value highly the environment of New Zealand. As I said, actually, in the survey work that's done and the advice that we've had, 99% of that either meets or exceeds tourist expectations. But it's the reason why the government in 2011 had the first national policy statement was on water. It's why the first detailed water quality standards were set out in 2014. It's why we had the independent state of the environment monitoring in 2015. It's why we set up the Land and Water Forum, and it's why we have been doing a number of other policy initiatives, including fencing off stock for farming from waterways.
Supplementary question, Melissa Lee.
To the Minister, what is the current state of the New Zealand tourism sector?
Well,
The Right Honourable John Key.
thank you very much for asking that informative question. Incredibly strong is the answer. We had a record 3.2 million tourists in 2015 with a record high levels of spending, directly contributing $10.6 billion into our economy and indirectly contributing a further $7.9 billion.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, James Shaw.
What data does he have that show that tourists prefer to wade in our rivers rather than dive in head first?
The Right Honourable John Key.
Mr. Speaker, I would always advise a tourist and a New Zealander to be careful diving in anywhere head first.
Supplementary.
Order. 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 Supplementary question, James Shaw.
Well, given that answer, Mr. Speaker, what budget has he allocated to inform the 3.3 million tourists arriving here this year that they can wade but not swim in 2/3 of our monitored rivers?
The Right Honourable John Key.
Mr. Speaker, waterways are far more swimmable than that. Mr. Speaker, of course, there are always signs that advise tourists, often signs anyway, for waterways if there's particular times when they can't be swimming. And if the member had wanted to know about diving in head first, I would have told him happily last week, diving in head first with Andrew Little isn't going to serve him very well.
Order. Supplementary question, Melissa Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Supplementary to the Minister, what is the biggest risk to the tourism industry?
Well, Mr. Speaker,
The Right Honourable John Key.
Another excellent question, Mr. Speaker. Well, workforce predictions indicate that up to 36,000 additional full-time workers in the tourism sector will be required by 2025, as well as an additional 26 hotels to house tourists. Given the opposition to foreign chefs and Resource Management Act reforms, the biggest threat to the tourism industry is a Labor Greens government.
Supplementary.
Order. Supplementary question, James Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What impact does recurring images of cattle defecating in our rivers and lakes have on the tourism industry, our international marketability and ultimately the economy?
Well, the Right Honourable John Key.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure the member's not aware of this, but the advertisements we run as part of 100% Pure tend to show our waterways and our mountains and the likes in beautiful condition, because many of them, most of the time, we don't show images of animals pooing in rivers, and that's why the government's stopping that. And if the member wants a lesson in effective marketing and what images to show, you should feel to come to my office and I'll show them all of those videos.
Supplementary.
Order. Order. Supplementary question. James Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What bottom line does he have as Minister of Tourism to support for our rivers and lakes, either wadable or swimmable?
The Right Honourable John Key.
Mr. Speaker, obviously my preference is swimmable, and that's why the government is working on the initiatives that we've had, which include spending hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars more than the previous government, including the national policy statement, including the policies stopping stock from going into waterways, Mr. Speaker. And over time, that's something that we'd like to achieve. But, Mr. Speaker, it's a very long process and took a long time to get here, and it will, in reality, take a long time to clean up all of those rivers.
Supplementary question, David Seymour.
Does the government have any plans, or has it received any advice on introducing a tax on entering or exiting the country as a tourist to help fund tourism infrastructure?
The Right Honourable John
Mr. Speaker,
Key.
Not recently, but Mr. Speaker, what is true is that a number of industry players have come to me as Minister of Tourism recommending that they do some work to come to the government on a potential charge which could be applied. There are many potential areas where it could be applied to build a tourism fund that could be used for infrastructure. Now, the government's neutral to that view at this point. It would need to look at it and would need to give some consideration to it. In the fullness of time when we receive it, we'll offer a view on it.
Question number 3,